What if you bought a business, let's say a restaurant, and you shell out a couple $100,000, buy the restaurant, only to find out a few weeks later that you're being evicted? It happens. Today what we're going to do is talk about that plus a few other things that you should know about when you're buying a business and what documents are required with regard to a business sale. Now, many times people think, oh, it's very simple. I get an agreement of sale. Sometimes we call it a purchase agreement. Sometimes we call it a sale agreement. And I get that, I sign it, I give the money, they tender the keys, and that's it. But it's not so simple, right? There are a lot of aspects that are involved when we're purchasing a business, and there's a lot of due diligence that's required. We're not going to discuss the due diligence today, but what we are going to discuss is the main 7 documents that you should have in every single business sale. And if you wait to the end, I'll give you a couple of bonus documents as well. So let's get started. First and foremost, when you're going to buy a business, and let's say you have an existing restaurant, and let's say it's a pizzeria, and I'm just trying to do this for purposes of keeping it simple, and I'm looking to buy a pizzeria, and the first thing, someone comes to me all excited, and I want to buy this, it's $100,000, and it's a beautiful deal, and it's great, and before anything else, the first thing I say is, let me see the lease. Like, what do you mean the lease? I go, well, is there a lease? How many years is the lease for? What are the terms of the lease? You have to know what you're buying, right? So one document is the lease. And I consider that the main document even before we deal with the agreement of sale. Because if we're not happy with the terms of the lease, then why bother entering into a contract to purchase or into a contract to sell? Not required, right? Kill the deal, done, move on, find the next one. Or sometimes once we know what the terms of the lease are, we understand what we need to negotiate to either get a new lease or some additional terms. But now we're dealing with an additional party, not just the seller of the business, but rather now we have to deal with the landlord. So we have to make sure the landlord's playing ball, that we're all on the same page with regard to getting the terms that we want on this sale. The second document is the agreement of sale. And the agreement of sale is gonna have the basic terms. And this is usually what people think when we call business terms, is they're gonna think about how much and when can I close. And that's what the typical consumer buyer is looking for. But an attorney is looking for many other aspects and representations and protections that need to be in that agreement of sale as they're performing their due diligence to make sure that their client's protected. Now, usually, I shouldn't say usually, almost every single time, both buyers and sellers, they want the deal done yesterday. Done, it's good, let's close tomorrow, I'm ready and I'm eager. And the lawyer comes in and says, whoa, 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 whoa. No, you can't. Because you have to do what's called a bulk sale notice. A bulk sale notice, what's that? Now, I'm not going to go into the fancy form names, but I will say to you that especially in New York, and various states have their version, but when we're doing a bulk sale notice, we have to notify New York as to the sale. And we've got to get clearance, and we want to make sure we're clear as far as the sales taxes are concerned. And we need to follow certain guidelines. So at the very least, we need to send this notice out and let 10 days pass. This is very important, which means you can't close in less than 10 days. Now, there are ways that I wouldn't recommend in today's market as far as workarounds. Many years ago, we would do certain escrows or various agreements, but now I don't recommend it. It's not worth the risk. What's a couple of days in the scheme of things? Then we have the assignment and assumption agreement. So what's an assignment and assumption agreement? Well, we have the lease that we talked about earlier, and we're purchasing the business, but the lease is meaningless if we don't have that lease assigned over to us, the new buyer. We need to have that lease assigned to us, and we will then assume that lease. Now, the assignment of lease has certain verbiage. It can be very simple. It could be a few pages long, but it's a necessary document. But many times people stop there, and the assignment is not enough. Why? Because we actually need, in many times, and we'll see what the language of the lease says, but we'd want it anyway. We want to consent to the assignment of the lease, which would be signed by the landlord. And that's very, very important. Not only is it important because it's giving us the actual consent to make sure everything is kosher and going down the right road, but it's also very important because there's going to be certain representations that you're going to want to be included in that consent. For example, you're going to want a representation to make sure that the current tenant is current on their rent. And so that this way, there's no default under the lease, so you don't have any surprises. So for example, if let's say the landlord says, sure, I consent to the assignment is done, everything's fine, you passed over the money, and to find out 3 months later, again, you're being evicted. That's a problem. Well, you consented to the assignment. Sure, I consented to the assignment. Now I got pockets, fresh pockets that I can collect from. So this is why you got to be a little leery with regard to this and make sure the proper language is inside it. Then we have the non-compete agreement. Non-compete is very important. You wouldn't like it if you went and spent your $100,000, bought the pizzeria, in business, things are going well, and one day you wake up and you realize that no one's coming anymore. What's going on? Where did everyone go? Why is business so slow? Only to find out, got a fly in here, only to find out that the guy who sold you the business opened up across the street and all his existing clientele, his customers are now going over to him. That's not fair. But guess what? He's able to do that. Capitalism. Of course he can. Unless you have certain documentation in place and certain security measures to back up that documentation. But in its essence, it's a non-compete agreement. You need to have one of those agreements. And of course, when the deal is done and you're closed, you're going to have your bill of sale. In the bill of sale, there's certain key language that you want to have that kind of tie in some of these other agreements. But we'll just mention the bill of sale by itself. Now, one of the bonus documents for those who made it this far is a non-disclosure agreement, your NDA, confidentiality agreement. And this is, it's a tricky document because on the one hand, it doesn't carry much weight, but on the other hand, it does. So you'd have to understand when you're using it, when it's needed, and not fooling yourself. Sometimes you may need it, or rather use it, knowing it doesn't carry so much weight, but yet nevertheless, it's still there in conjunction with all the other documents as a package as a whole, okay? Now, I'm also gonna give you some bonus documents if, for example, you're the seller and not the purchaser, right? Many times when you're selling and someone's offering you that $100,000, they don't have the $100,000 all at once. So what they want to do is say, okay, fine, I'll give you, let's say $50,000 now, and I'll pay you $50,000 over the course of 1 year, for example. Well, how do you protect that money? How do you protect it? Well, it's called a promissory note. Very simple. So you need to make sure as a seller that you have a promissory note in place on the loan that you're making, okay? But the note alone is not enough because you need to secure that loan. Just like when you're buying a house, a bank's gonna give you a mortgage. There's a note, which is the promissory note, for example, with regard to the bank, but then they're gonna use a security agreement. They have the ability to foreclose and take that house back. That's called a mortgage when it comes to houses. But when it comes to a business sale, or when you're buying the restaurant, or selling the restaurant rather, we would call it a security agreement. And the security agreement can take various forms. And I'm not going to go into detail on this particular video, but at its very essence, you also want to file a lien, a UCC lien on the actual equipment and various things that exist on the premises, just to give yourself that little extra protection. Now, many times when we're doing these sales, we're going to be selling to an LLC, a limited liability company, or to a corporation. So we also want to have some additional protection because we don't want to go only after the corporation or the LLC in the event that they default. So this is where the personal guarantee comes into play. So an additional document you're going to want is a personal guarantee. The UCC we discussed, and you may also want a collateral document, right? And so this ties in with regard to the security, but sometimes as collateral, we can do a collateral reassignment of the lease, so it comes back to our possession to hold it until they pay off the balance of the loan. Now, those particular documents are more so when we're dealing with a loan and when we're on the seller side. As to the buyer, he doesn't care, and he's not going to tell you need them. So you need to be aware. Okay, that's it, guys, right? If you liked what you hear, let me know. I can also put a list together of the documents that you need. If anyone's interested, just leave a comment below and I'll put together a PDF. I'll put together a checklist. Okay? Thank you. And don't forget to subscribe.